On the surface, Muğla in southwest Turkey seemed like one of the safest corners of the country. A student hub where universities thrived, young people filled cafes, and tourists drifted in and out of the Aegean coastline, enjoying the laid-back charm of a city built on tradition and youth. To most, Muğla was a place where nothing extraordinary ever happened, at least nothing sinister. Yet in the summer of 2020, this quiet city would become the center of a tragedy so dark that it shattered the illusion of safety, sparked protests across the nation, and left a permanent scar in the fight for women's rights in Turkey. At the center of this story was Pınar Gültekin, a young woman who came to Muğla to study, to build her future, and to chase the dreams that every student carries when leaving home. What began as a simple journey of education turned into the story of her disappearance and brutal death. A story that resonated with millions because it symbolized something larger. The everyday dangers women face when no is not accepted as an answer. A childhood in Bitlis. Pınar was born in 1993 in Bitlis province, a conservative and traditional part of eastern Turkey. Life there moved slowly, shaped by the rhythms of family, community, and custom. The Gultekin family was well respected. Her father, Gultekin, was a man of principles, raised in a patriarchal society where honor and reputation mattered above all else. Her mother, Femicide, managed the home and raised the children with discipline, but also with care. Growing up in Bitlis meant living under constant observation. For girls especially, there were rules about where you could go, how you behaved, who you spoke to, and what people might say. Every action was measured not just by the family, but by neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances. But even in this environment, Pinar stood out. From an early age, she was described as bright, social, and ambitious. She loved books, music, and especially languages, while many of her peers were expected to stay within the boundaries of home life. She dreamed bigger. She wanted education, she wanted independence, and she wanted to see the world beyond the mountains of Bitlis. Her family, unlike many others, supported her academic ambitions. Her father believed that an educated daughter brought honor to the family. Her mother balanced that belief with constant reminders of tradition, encouraging Pinar to carry respect for her roots, even as she looked outward. The result was a young woman who embodied both worlds, conservative values in her heart, but modern aspirations in her mind. The move to Muğla. When Pinar was accepted into Muğla's Kosman University to study economics, it was a turning point. Moving hundreds of miles away from Bitlis meant a new kind of freedom. She rented a small apartment in the Akyaka district, where most students lived. Her days quickly filled with lectures, library visits, group projects, and long nights of preparing her thesis. In Muğla, she carved out a life for herself. Friends described her as hardworking, caring, and dependable. She helped classmates with notes, participated in study groups, and joined campus events. Professors remembered her as attentive and serious about her future. Outside academics, Pinar loved music and dance. She posted photos on social media, pictures with friends at cafes, little glimpses of her daily life. Unlike many, she never lost touch with her family back home. She called her sister often, keeping her updated on school and her plans for after graduation. By 2020, she was close to finishing her degree. Her thesis was almost complete, and she talked about further studies abroad, maybe joining a language program in Europe. She was young, ambitious, and just at the edge of stepping into adulthood with all the promise it held. But it was in Muğla, amid the normal routines of classes and campus life, that Pinar met a man who would eventually end her life, the café owner. Across from the university stood a small café. Students went there between classes for coffee or tea, sometimes to review notes, sometimes just to socialize. The owner was Cemal Metin Avcı, a 32-year-old man, married and the father of two. To most, Cemal appeared polite, soft-spoken, and hard-working. He knew his customers well, remembered their favorite drinks, and maintained his café as a comfortable stop for students. On the surface, there was nothing alarming about him. For Pinar, the café became a regular stop. She would bring her books, order her usual coffee, and sit quietly before her next lecture. At first, her interactions with Cemal were routine. He was just the café owner, nothing more. He took her order, exchanged polite small talk, and went about his work. But slowly, his attention shifted. He began noticing her schedule. When she came, what she ordered, when her breaks were. He remembered her drink, offered to have it ready for her, and started asking about her classes and exams. At first, it seemed like normal friendliness. Many café owners make small talk with regular customers. But Cemal's interest did not stop there. from friendly to intrusive. Cemal found Pinar on Instagram. His first interactions were harmless, likes, emojis, short comments on her photos. But soon, the comments became more frequent, more personal. He began complimenting her appearance, suggesting places she could visit, and paying closer attention to the details of her posts. Then he asked for her phone number. His reason sounded practical. It would be easier to inform her when tables were free or when her usual order was ready. Believing it was part of the normal customer relationship, Pinar gave him her number. She didn't see it as anything unusual. Once he had her number, the messages changed. Instead of updates about the café, Cemal started asking personal questions. How was your day?
Where are you now?
Who are you with? If she didn't respond, he would send follow-up messages within minutes. At first, Pinar responded politely but briefly. She avoided personal conversations, kept her answers neutral, and hoped that by not encouraging him, he would lose interest. But Cemal did not stop. The messages increased, sometimes late at night, sometimes during her study sessions. He started sending her photos of himself, updates about the café, even about his private life. His tone was still polite, but his persistence became overwhelming. Misinterpretation or obsession. There were two versions of what happened between them, repeated later in court documents and public debates. In one version, Cemal believed there had been some intimacy between them, and when Pinar discovered he was married with children, she pulled away. In the other version, there was never any relationship at all, only a man who misinterpreted politeness as interest, persistence as entitlement. Whichever version was true, the result was the same. Pinar said no. She began distancing herself, limiting replies, avoiding the café and refusing to meet him privately. She kept things polite, but she was clear in her refusal. For Cemal, that refusal was unbearable. What should have ended as a one-sided interest became something darker, an obsession. Friends noticing the danger. By the early months of 2020, Pinar's friends had started to notice Cemal's presence. He appeared near her lecture halls, lingered around student gathering spots, and seemed to show up wherever she went. They warned her, "Has watching you. Be careful." They suggested she change her routes, avoid walking alone at night, and cut him off completely. Pinar reassured them that she was handling it. She believed that keeping polite but firm boundaries would prevent things from escalating. She didn't want conflict. She didn't want to involve authorities. She assumed that if she ignored him, he would eventually stop. But Cemal did not stop. Every time she refused, he persisted harder. Every wall she put up, he tried to climb over. Every silence, he filled with more messages, more calls, more presence in her life. For Pinar, it was suffocating. For Cemal, it was personal to him. Her refusal was not just rejection, it was humiliation. And humiliation in his world demanded a response. July 16th, 2020, the last day. By the summer of 2020, Pinar was just weeks away from finishing her degree. She had big plans. Her thesis was nearly done, and she talked excitedly about future opportunities. Her life was moving forward. On July 16th, around 3:00 p.m., she called her sister. The conversation was short. She said she was going to a meeting. She didn't say with whom. That call was the last time her family ever heard her voice. When her phone went silent afterward, no one worried immediately. Maybe her battery died, maybe she was busy. But by nightfall, alarm grew. By the next morning, panic had set in. Her family reported her missing. Her photos circulated on social media. Posters went up around town. Students, friends, even strangers joined in the search. But there were no signs. What no one knew then was that Pinar had already crossed paths with Cemal for the last time. And in that meeting, his obsession would turn into violence that stunned not only her loved ones but the entire country. Escalation and the shadow of obsession. From the outside, life in Muğla still looked normal. Students filled classrooms, cafes buzzed with chatter, and the summer heat wrapped the city in its usual rhythm. But for Pınar Gultekin, what had started as harmless interaction was transforming into something that weighed on her daily existence. The line between friendliness and intrusion had blurred, and she felt it pressing closer with every passing week, a growing unease. Cemal Metin Avcı, the cafe owner who once seemed nothing more than a polite acquaintance, was now everywhere in her orbit. It began with small gestures that were difficult to define as threatening. He remembered her schedule, appeared when her classes ended, lingered in places where students gathered. To anyone else, it looked coincidental. But to Pinar's closest friends, it was becoming clear this was not coincidence. Messages that were once casual turned into constant interruptions. He sent her texts asking about her whereabouts, who she was with, and how long she would be out. If she didn't answer within minutes, follow-ups arrived. She tried to stay polite, giving short replies or none at all. To her, ignoring the messages seemed the safest way to de-escalate. She feared that being harsh might provoke him further. But what she didn't realize was that her silence only fed his persistence. Friends start to worry. Her classmates began noticing the pattern too. They saw Cemal outside lecture halls, near the cafeteria, even at bus stops. It was as though he had learned her routes and was mapping her daily routine. Be careful, her friends warned. He's watching you. Change your path. Don't go out alone. Pinar reassured them she was fine. She explained that she didn't want drama. She wanted to finish her thesis, graduate, and move forward. In her mind, this was a temporary problem. If she stayed consistent, polite but firm, refusing meetings and ignoring excessive messages, he would eventually lose interest. But she underestimated the danger. What she saw as distance, Cemal saw as challenge. Every no was not a barrier but an invitation for him to push harder. The versions of their connection. Later, when investigators pieced together the story, two versions of their relationship emerged. In one version, there had been a brief closeness. Pinar may have accepted his attention at first, not knowing he was married. Once she discovered his family life, she cut off contact. In the other version, there had never been anything more than business and polite exchanges. Cemal misinterpreted her politeness as interest, twisting neutral interactions into something they were not. Both versions ended the same way. Pinar said no. Whether she was rejecting his pursuit or cutting off a mistake, she made it clear she did not want contact. For many, that should have been the end. But for Cemal, the rejection turned into something else: humiliation. And humiliation quickly became obsession, signs of stalking. Cemal's persistence escalated. He started appearing outside her apartment building. He monitored her social media activity, often commenting within minutes of her posts. He began calling late at night, sometimes repeatedly. If she didn't answer, he left short, unsettling messages. Why are you ignoring me? Don't avoid me. We need to talk. What might look like annoyance on paper was, in practice, a slow tightening of control. He wanted to occupy every space in her life. Her phone, her routine, even her silence. Pinar tried to avoid direct confrontation. She didn't want to escalate the situation. She believed he would eventually stop. But to those around her, the danger was already clear. Her friends saw his behavior as stalking, even if she avoided labeling it that way. Pride and possession. For Cemal, this was not about love. It was about pride. Here was a man in his 30s, married, a father, watching a young student, bright, ambitious, independent, say no to him. In his mind, that refusal was not simply rejection. It was an insult, a blow to his pride as a man. He began framing her refusal as provocation. Why are you avoiding me? Don't act like you're better than me. These phrases, repeated later in his confessions, revealed his state of mind. He was not letting go. He was convincing himself that her rejection was an attack, and in his world, an attack demanded a response. The last weeks, by the summer of 2020, Pinar's life was full. Her thesis was nearly complete, and she spoke to her family often about plans after graduation. She thought about studying languages abroad, maybe pursuing work in Europe. She was excited, full of hope, and ready to move forward. Her social media reflected that optimism. Photos with friends, little updates about her days, glimpses into a life on the cusp of new beginnings. But beneath those images was tension. She had already started avoiding the café. She told friends she didn't want contact with Cemal. She stopped responding to his messages. She thought distance would solve the problem, but the distance only deepened his fixation. The more she pulled away, the more determined he became to pull her back. July 16, 2020, the meeting. On July 16, the heat of summer weighed heavy on Muğla. That afternoon, at around 3:00 p.m., Pinar called her sister. The call was short. She said she was heading to a meeting. She gave no details. It was the last time her family heard her voice. Later that day, surveillance cameras captured her near a shopping center. She was sitting on a bench. Beside her was a man, Cemal. Minutes later, they stood up and walked away together. From that moment on, her phone went silent. Messages went undelivered. Calls went unanswered. By evening, concern turned into panic. Pinar was never unreachable. Even on her busiest days, she always found time to send a message. Her family knew immediately something was wrong. The missing person report. The next morning, her mother and sister traveled to Muğla. They went straight to the police and filed a missing person report. Officers began the standard investigation, checking her last phone records, tracing her steps through surveillance cameras, questioning friends. Posters went up across town. Social media flooded with her photos. but every lead turned up empty. She wasn't seen at the university, in her neighborhood, or downtown. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. For her family, the fear was unbearable. For her friends, the warnings they had given now felt like echoes of something inevitable. And for investigators, one name stood out almost immediately: Cemal Metin Avcı. Cemal denies, then changes his story. When police questioned Cemal, he first denied everything. He said he hadn't seen Pinar that day, but surveillance footage proved otherwise. The cameras had captured them together. His denials began to crack. In his second statement, he admitted they had met. He said they had gone to a house in the rural village of Iflikli, just outside Muğla. There, he claimed, an argument broke out. He said she provoked him, mocked him, and in anger, things got out of control. He insisted it was not intentional, but the contradictions in his story raised red flags. At first, he said he hadn't seen her. Then he admitted he had. At first, he denied being in the village. Then he described it in detail. The more he spoke, the more inconsistencies emerged. The truth begins to surface. Investigators pressed him for details. Where did the argument happen? How did she die? What did he do afterward? His answers shifted with each retelling. In one version, she insulted him. In another, she threatened to expose him to his wife. In yet another, she demanded money. Each time, he painted himself as the victim, twisting the story to justify his actions. But his confessions had one common thread. He admitted she stopped showing signs of life in his presence. And he admitted to attempting to dispose of her body. The chilling reality was beginning to surface, but the true horror of what he had done had not yet been revealed. The calm before the discovery. As police pieced together his statements, they dispatched a forensic team to the rural house he mentioned. They followed his directions into the countryside, searching for any sign of Pinar. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. Behind the house were signs of a fire, burned soil, charred debris, traces of something heavy dragged across the ground. And in a nearby clearing, investigators saw something strange: a plastic barrel, sealed, filled with cement. When they broke it open, they discovered the truth. Inside was the body of Pınar Gultekin, hidden beneath layers of cement, concealed in an attempt to erase her existence. The city that had seemed so peaceful just days before was now the stage for one of Turkey's most horrifying crimes. The scene in Iflikli. The rural house stood isolated among fields and low hills, a place where the noises of the city never reached. Forensic teams moved cautiously through the property, documenting everything. Behind the house, they found the remnants of a fire, charred ground, partially burned materials, and drag marks across the soil. Following those marks led them to the barrel. It was a large plastic container, the kind used for storing fuel or agricultural supplies, but instead of tools or liquid, it was filled with cement. Breaking it open was slow and methodical. Layer after layer chipped away under floodlights as night fell around the team. Inside, wrapped and compressed under the hardened mixture, lay Pinar's body. Even for experienced investigators, the scene was shocking. This was not an accident, not a sudden act of panic. This was deliberate concealment, planned with time and effort. Cemal's changing stories back at the police station. Cemal Metin Avcı sat in custody. At first, he denied everything. Then he admitted to meeting her. Then he claimed an argument had gotten out of control. When confronted with the discovery of the barrel, his tone shifted again. He admitted to trying to burn her body. When that failed, he said, he bought cement, filled the barrel, and hid it in the clearing. But his explanations of how she died kept changing. In one version, he said they argued, and she insulted him, claiming she was seeing someone else. He said he lost his temper, strangled her, and panicked when she stopped moving. In another version, he claimed she threatened to tell his wife about their supposed affair. He insisted she demanded money to stay silent, painting himself as the victim of blackmail. In yet another story, he claimed self-defense, that she attacked him first, tried to stab him, and he was forced to defend himself. Each version contradicted the last. The timeline shifted, the motives shifted, but one fact never changed. Pinar was alive when she entered that house, and she was dead when she left. The autopsy results stripped away the lies. Forensic doctors documented soft tissue injuries, bruises consistent with blunt force, and clear evidence of strangulation. But the most critical finding was soot in her lungs and airways. This meant she was still breathing when the fire was set. She was alive as the flames rose around her. The cause of death was ruled asphyxia, due to smoke inhalation combined with thermal injuries. This single fact destroyed Cemal's narrative of an accident. During an argument, it proved intent, cruelty, and awareness. He had not just killed her, He had tried to erase her existence by fire, and when that failed, he entombed her in cement. Evidence of planning investigators traced his actions after the crime. Receipts and surveillance footage showed that after Pinar's death, Cemal purchased cement and materials. He transported them back to the rural house, mixed the concrete, and sealed her body in the barrel. Phone records revealed he had destroyed her SIM card and thrown her phone away. Search logs suggested he had looked for secluded areas. Witnesses recalled seeing him buy fuel shortly before the fire was set. Every step pointed not to a sudden loss of control, but to calculated cover-up. The brother's shadow, another figure, soon entered the investigation. Cemal's brother, Mertcan. Cell tower data placed Mertcan's phone in the same rural area on the day of the crime. His device connected to towers near the house and later near the clearing where the barrel was discovered. When questioned, he denied involvement. He insisted he was running errands and that the phone records were coincidence. But investigators suspected otherwise. The data overlapped too closely with Cemal's timeline. Was Mertcan present when the body was hidden? Did he help with the cement, or was he only aware afterward? Cemal insisted he acted alone, but the question of Mertcan's involvement lingered, leaving investigators torn between family loyalty and digital evidence. Cemal's justifications during interrogations. Cemal repeated one theme again and again: provocation. She provoked me. She mocked me. She threatened me. Each version placed the blame on Pinar, as though her rejection, her independence, her refusal to accept his intrusion somehow justified his violence. When asked if he felt remorse, he gave short, flat answers: "I'm sorry." But in the same breath, he emphasized her supposed insults and threats. His words revealed not remorse but resentment. A man unwilling to accept responsibility, still clinging to his pride, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. The public reaction as news broke of the discovery. Turkey erupted in grief and anger. Pinar's face appeared on posters, banners, and social media profiles. Her story was no longer just about one young woman. It became a symbol of something larger. The epidemic of violence against women, the refusal of society to take harassment seriously until it was too late. Protests swept through Istanbul, Ankara, Azama, and Muğla. Thousands marched with black and white photos of women who had been killed. They demanded justice, not only for Pinar, but for all victims silenced by violence. Hashtags carrying her name trended for weeks. Women across Turkey shared their own stories of harassment, threats, and stalking. Pinar's death became the spark that ignited a movement. The family's agony for Pinar's family, the pain was indescribable. Her father, Sadi, had raised her with hopes of independence, proud that his daughter would graduate and step into a future brighter than his own. Now he faced the unthinkable, burying her under a storm of media cameras, knowing the world would remember her not for her achievements, but for the violence that ended her life. Her mother, Fika, clung to her daughter's photos, her voice breaking in every interview. She demanded justice, calling for the harshest punishment possible. Her sister carried the unbearable memory of that final phone call. A simple, ordinary conversation that became the last trace of her sister's voice. They did not just lose Pinar. They lost the future she carried, the dreams she had, the life she should have lived. A nation watching by the time the case reached the courtroom. It was no longer just about one man and one woman. It had become a test for the entire legal system. Would the court treat this as premeditated murder, as the evidence clearly showed, or would it fall into the pattern of leniency, reducing punishment under the banner of provocation? Every hearing was packed with journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens outside. Protesters gathered with signs reading, "We want justice for Pinar," and "Stop femicides." The courtroom was not just a place of law. It was a stage where Turkey's conscience was on trial. The courtroom stage in November 2020. The trial began in Muğla. The courtroom was packed every session. Journalists filled the benches, cameras crowded the hallways, and activists gathered outside with signs and banners. Inside, Pinar's parents and sisters sat quietly, their faces lined with grief. Every hearing forced them to relive the details of her death: the barrel, the fire, the bruises, the strangulation. For them, justice was not just a sentence. It was the only way left to honor their daughter. The prosecution came armed with forensic reports, phone records, surveillance footage, and Cemal's own inconsistent statements. Their argument was clear: this was premeditated murder. A young woman had rejected a man's advances, and for that, she was killed, burned, entombed in cement. But the defense had a different strategy. They leaned on one of Turkey's most controversial legal doctrines: Unjust provocation. The defense of provocation in Turkish law, the concept of haksız tahrik, unjust provocation, can reduce sentences if the defendant proves they were provoked into losing control. Over the years, it had been used to reduce sentences for men who killed women, often with claims that the victim insulted them, humiliated them, or betrayed them. For women's rights groups, this law was not a tool of justice but a weapon against victims. It suggested that words, even a refusal, even independence, could be treated as justification for violence. Cemal's lawyers framed Pinar as the aggressor. They claimed she had mocked him, insulted his pride, and provoked him into a sudden act of rage. They insisted the murder was not planned, but the result of emotional disturbance.